All right, so today we're diving into one of history's biggest puzzles, a guy named Socrates. He's described as, well, not very impressive, owned pretty much nothing, and get this, he never wrote down a single word. So, how did he become a philosophical superstar? That's the mystery we're going to unpack.
I mean, that's the real paradox here, right? No books, no letters, not even a grocery list to his name. And yet here we are, 2.5 millennia later, and he's not just some influential thinker. You could argue he's the foundation of Western thought, the whole thing. How on earth is that even possible? So, to figure this out, here's our game plan. We'll look at the man himself, the one who wrote nothing. Then we'll get into his unique art of asking questions. We'll explore his whole philosophy about the unexamined life. Then comes the drama, the trial. And finally, we'll ask, why should we even care about Socrates today?
Okay, first up, the man who wrote nothing. So, let's picture it. We're in ancient Athens. It's the center of the universe, you know? A hotspot for democracy, art, new ideas. And walking through this amazing marketplace is this really strange guy, and he's about to turn everything upside down.
And yeah, that strange guy, that was Socrates. He wasn't some king or a famous general. Nope. He just wandered around, barefoot by the way, in shabby clothes, and he'd walk right up to the most powerful people in the city, the politicians, the famous poets, the master craftsmen, and he'd just start asking them questions. Really simple but impossible questions like, so what is justice really? Or, tell me, what is courage? And the craziest part of all this, the only reason we know any of it is because his students, especially this one brilliant guy named Plato, wrote it all down for him. But, relying on his students like that, it creates this massive headache for historians. They call it the Socratic problem. Because Plato didn't just take notes. He made Socrates the hero of his own philosophical books, his dialogues. So we can never be totally sure how much of this is the real, historical Socrates and how much is just Plato's version. It's kind of like trying to write a biography of a movie director, but your only source is their #1 biggest fan. You're going to get a slightly biased view, right?
And this quote right here, this really gets to the heart of what Socrates thought he was doing. He said he was a midwife of ideas. He wasn't a teacher who just, lectures at you and pours information into your brain. No, he believed the truth, the real insights, were already inside you. He just saw his job as helping you deliver them, helping you give birth to your own wisdom. So how did he actually do that? How did he act as this midwife? Well, Socrates had a weapon. And it wasn't a sword or a spear. It was a way of talking. A special technique for asking questions. A method so powerful, it's literally still used today in places like law schools and medical schools to train people to think.
Okay, so this Socratic method, or Alinkus, here's how it works. He'd find someone who's super confident about something. Let's say a general who's like, I know what courage is. Courage is standing your ground and never retreating. Socrates would nod and then ask something like, okay, but what if you do a strategic retreat to lure the enemy into a trap? Is that cowardly or is that actually a really courageous move? And the general would have to say, well, yeah, that's courageous too. And boom, right there. Socrates just showed that the original definition doesn't work. It's flawed. But the point wasn't to make the general look stupid. The goal was to get them both to a place of humility, to where they could say, okay, you know what? Maybe we don't know what courage is after all. And that's where the real search for truth could begin. Together.
Now, this whole approach, this obsession with finding the truth, put him in direct conflict with the big-shot teachers of his day, the sophists. Think of the sophists as like high-priced consultants or debate coaches. Rich people paid them a ton of money to learn how to win any argument, regardless of whether they were right or wrong. It was all about persuasion. And then you have Socrates, who shows up, takes no money, and the only thing he claims to know is that he knows nothing. You can see how he'd be a major threat to their business model, right?
And this method, it wasn't just some clever debate trick. For Socrates, it was the tool. It was how he dug into the biggest questions about how to live. And that led him to what is probably his most famous and powerful statement of all.
And just think about when he said this. He wasn't chilling in a lecture hall. He said this at his own trial, when his life was on the line. He basically said he would rather die than live a life where he couldn't think, question, and philosophize. So, what exactly is this unexamined life he's talking about?
Well, for Socrates, an unexamined life is basically living on autopilot. It's when you're just chasing the things everyone else chases, money, fame, power, without stopping to ask yourself if that's what you truly want. It's just accepting the rules and beliefs you're handed without ever asking, wait, why? It's being a slave to your own fears and desires without even realizing it. Socrates believed that our ability to stop and think, to reflect, that's what makes us human. And if you don't use that ability, if you don't examine your own life, you're kind of wasting the most important part of yourself. You're neglecting your soul.
And this whole idea led him to another really radical conclusion, that virtue is knowledge. Now, stick with me here. Socrates believed that no one voluntarily does the wrong thing. He argued that when people do bad things, it's really just a form of ignorance. They do wrong because they don't truly understand what is good. For example, someone might steal, thinking, hey, this money will make me happy. But Socrates would say, they're ignorant. They don't see that they're trading away their integrity and their peace of mind for a bit of cash, and that's a terrible deal.
Okay, so as you can probably guess, going around Athens and basically telling everyone they're ignorant, yeah, that didn't make him very popular, especially with people in power. He actually had a great metaphor for himself. He said he was a gadfly, and unfortunately for him, that gadfly was about to get swatted.
Here's how he put it. He saw the city of Athens as this big, noble, but kind of lazy horse. And he said that he, Socrates, was the gadfly, that annoying little fly that a god had sent to bite and sting the horse. Why? To wake it up, to keep it from getting slow and complacent, to keep it sharp. But let's be honest, nobody likes being the one who gets stung.
And his timing was just terrible. Athens was on shaky ground. The city had just lost a devastating war. It had gone through this short, brutal dictatorship. And now the democracy that came back was fragile and super paranoid. They were looking for scapegoats. And in that kind of climate, a guy who constantly questions authority and tradition, well, his questioning starts to look less like a philosophical game and more like a genuine threat.
So sure enough, in 399 BCE, Socrates was put on trial. The official charges? 1. Impiety, not believing in the city's gods. And 2. Corrupting the youth. But here's the thing about his defense. It wasn't really a legal defense at all. He didn't try to argue the points. Instead, he basically doubled down. He argued that he was following a divine mission, a mission from the god Apollo, in fact. And as for corrupting the youth, he said he was just teaching them the single most important thing they could ever learn, how to examine themselves.
The jury found him guilty, but only by a pretty small margin. And then they asked him to propose his own punishment. Now, he could have easily just suggested banishment and walked away. He would have lived. But instead, in this unbelievable act of defiance, he says that as a penalty, he should be given free meals for life at the city's expense. That was an honor reserved for Olympic champions and war heroes. It was a total slap in the face to the court. And that sealed his fate. The jury, now furious, sentenced him to death. But even then, facing his own execution, he was a philosopher to the very end. He told his friends, who were all weeping, that it's just silly to fear death. Why? Because we don't know what it is. Fearing the unknown, he said, is just pretending to be wise when you're not. For all we know, death might just be the greatest blessing a person can receive. And with that, he drank the poison hemlock, completely calm. So the man died, but the idea, his way of thinking, became immortal. Which brings us to our final question. Why does this barefoot philosopher from ancient Athens still matter so much to us, 2,500 years later? Well, his legacy is just huge. I mean, think about it. The whole idea of critical thinking, the engine that drives science, modern education, all of it. You can trace that right back to Socrates. He's the one who started to shift morality from being about what the gods commanded to being about what your own reason tells you is right. His stand at the trial, that's the blueprint for civil disobedience. And maybe most importantly, he's the one who told us that the most important journey you'll ever take is the one inward, to figure out who you really are. So in the end, Socrates didn't really leave us with any answers, did he? What he left us with was a method, a tool, and a challenge. He taught us that real wisdom doesn't start with knowing it all. It starts with having the humility and the courage to ask a question. So, I'll leave you with his challenge. What's one thing you believe, one accepted truth in your life that you're going to question today? Thanks for joining us.